The Arizona sun burned low on the horizon, casting long copper shadows across the rugged terrain. Dust clung to every surface, the air dry as parchment. Eleanor Hayes tightened the reins of her horse as it slowed near the creek bed. She hadn't planned to ride this far out, not today. But a hunch, a whisper of instinct, had led her down the trail behind the canyon ridge, where coyotes howled too often at night. She spotted the bundle before she even realized what it was. A heap of fabric, half buried in red sand, looked like discarded laundry or a settler's lost gear. But as she approached, the sight rooted her in place. Blood. Too much blood. The blanket was tattered, soaked through, and inside it, a child. Eleanor dropped to her knees, trembling hands peeling the fabric back. The girl was still breathing, barely. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes closed. She looked no older than 4. Blood stained her small nightgown. But Eleanor couldn't tell whose it was, hers or someone else's. A rusty locket hung around her neck, catching the last ray of sunlight like a dying ember. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't move. Her thoughts raced back to her own son, Jacob, buried under that oak tree 5 winters ago. Same dark hair, same small hands. But this wasn't her boy, and this child was still alive. Without another thought, she lifted the girl into her arms. The child stirred but didn't speak, didn't cry. Just curled into Eleanor's chest like she belonged there. The ride back to the ranch was long and silent, save for the creaking of leather and the distant cry of hawks overhead. Eleanor wrapped the girl in her coat, her own shirt wet with blood by the time they reached the porch. Inside she cleaned the wounds, shallow cuts, bruises, and one nasty gash on her leg, but none looked fatal. It was the silence that worried Eleanor more than the injuries. For 2 days the girl didn't speak, didn't weep, just stared at the wall with hollow eyes. Eleanor fed her, bathed her, and sat beside her through the long nights. By the 3rd day, the child clung to her without prompting. When Eleanor brushed her hair, the girl leaned into her hand. When the wind rattled the windows, she crawled under Eleanor's quilt. Still, not a word. Eleanor named her Clara. It felt right. Simple, soft, like a whisper of hope in a world gone hard. Out in the towns beyond the hills, whispers began to rise, strange stories of a bloodied child, of a widow who'd found something she wasn't meant to. But Eleanor didn't hear them, not yet. Her world was here now beside the fire, holding a child who had no voice, but whose presence spoke volumes. Before we unravel what happened to Clara and the chilling truth behind her silence, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The months that followed moved like the wind, quiet, relentless, full of invisible weight. Clara never spoke. She watched the world with solemn, searching eyes, as if waiting for someone to appear, someone she'd lost. But she never asked questions, never whispered a name. Eleanor gave her space, then comfort, then love, not all at once, but gradually, like a lantern lit in the dark. Life on the ranch resumed its rhythm. Eleanor taught Clara how to feed the chickens, to brush the mare's coat, to knead bread with steady hands. The girl followed every movement with care, mimicking in silence. Sometimes she smiled, just barely. Other times, she stared into the fire for hours, her fingers tightening around the little locket she always wore. Eleanor had tried opening it once. It wouldn't budge. The engraving on the outside was worn, the script almost unreadable. But Clara never let it out of her sight. It stayed with her during chores, meals, sleep. A secret held tight by a child too young to bear it. Neighbors stopped by less frequently. Word had spread that Eleanor had taken in a stray child, one covered in blood and silence. Some offered sympathy, others suspicion. A few whispered that she'd gone mad with grief, raising a ghost in the shadow of her dead son. Eleanor ignored them all. Clara was here, alive, and that was all that mattered. By the 2nd year, Clara had grown taller, stronger. She moved with confidence now, though she still hadn't spoken a single word. Her eyes had changed too, less hollow, more alert, like a storm held back behind glass. Eleanor wondered if the silence was a wound deeper than the skin, something no medicine could reach. One autumn evening, as orange leaves scattered across the fields, Clara sat on the porch beside Eleanor, holding a small piece of wood she'd carved into the shape of a horse. She handed it over without a sound. Eleanor took it gently. "You made this?" she asked, her voice soft. Clara nodded. Eleanor smiled. "It's beautiful." Clara looked at her, expression unreadable, then leaned her head on Eleanor's shoulder. The moment passed like a fragile breath, quiet but full. That night, Eleanor wrote a letter to a doctor in Flagstaff asking about trauma in children. The reply came weeks later, filled with long words and little help. "Time," it read. Time and stability. But time didn't answer questions, and Clara still carried hers, locked behind silent lips and frightened dreams. In the nearby town of Dry Hollow, news came and went like tumbleweeds. A banker lost his ranch. A saloon caught fire. A traveler spoke of a girl who looked familiar, missing years ago from another county. But no one made the connection. Not yet. Eleanor didn't press Clara for answers. She simply waited, watched, and hoped. Somewhere in the quiet, the truth was waiting too. But it wasn't ready, and neither, perhaps, was Clara. Not yet. By the time Clara turned 7, the ranch had settled into something close to peace. Morning chores, quiet meals, shared silences that no longer felt empty. Eleanor often caught herself forgetting how Clara had arrived, forgetting the blood, the stillness, the unspoken history. But the past has a way of knocking, even when you don't answer the door. It was a cold spring morning when the stranger appeared. Eleanor had ridden into Dry Hollow for supplies, flour, salt, some tobacco. Clara had stayed behind, tending the goats. The town was quiet, save for the clinking of tools and the soft thud of boots on wooden planks. At the general store, Eleanor loaded her burlap sack with care, nodding to the shopkeeper without much talk. But just as she turned to leave, a voice called out behind her, "Where'd you find the girl?" She froze. The man was tall, dusty, unshaven. A drifter's coat hung off his shoulders, and a scar split the left side of his chin. His eyes held something sharper than curiosity, recognition. Eleanor met his gaze, her grip tightening on the sack. "What girl?" He smirked. "The quiet one. Black hair, big eyes, wears a busted locket." Eleanor didn't answer. She stepped past him without a word, her heart pounding like hooves on dry ground. When she turned back at the door, he was gone, vanished into the crowd like smoke. She returned home uneasy, eyes scanning the horizon, ears tuned to every breeze. Clara greeted her at the gate with a faint smile, unaware of the storm building beyond the hills. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire long after Clara had gone to bed, staring into the flames. The man had known things he shouldn't. And Clara's silence suddenly felt more like a secret than a wound. The nightmares returned soon after. Clara would bolt upright in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, breath shallow and rapid. She never screamed, but she'd sit trembling, staring at the far wall as if someone stood there. Eleanor would hold her, whispering calm until sleep came again. One night, as Eleanor wiped Clara's forehead with a cool cloth, she heard a murmur, soft, almost inaudible. "Benedict." Eleanor paused. "What did you say?" Clara didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered closed again, lips still. But Eleanor had heard it clearly. A single word. The next morning, Clara acted as if nothing had happened. But Eleanor couldn't shake it. That word Benedict echoed in her mind like a bell. She didn't know what it meant. A name, maybe, a place, or something worse. She wrote it down on a scrap of paper and tucked it into her journal. Just in case. Days passed, then weeks. The drifter never returned, but Eleanor kept a rifle by the door and watched the road more than usual. Clara carried on quiet as ever, the locket still hanging from her neck like a weight from another life. Whatever truth lay behind her silence had stirred, and Eleanor could feel it. Ghosts don't stay buried forever. The morning Clara turned 11 was quiet. No celebration, no candles, just the soft rustle of wind through dry mesquite and the smell of warm bread cooling on the windowsill. Eleanor marked the day only in her journal, adding a short note. She's grown into a willow still but rooted deep. That afternoon, Clara sat alone under the cottonwood tree near the fence line, carving lines into the dirt with a stick. Eleanor watched from the porch, coffee in hand, when she noticed Clara freeze, her back stiff, shoulders drawn. Eleanor stood, concern rising. Clara turned slowly, and for the first time in years she spoke aloud. "Benedict." The word floated through the air like a shot in still water, sudden, echoing, impossible to ignore. Eleanor's cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the porch boards. Clara looked down again, silent once more, but the damage was done. The name had returned, this time not in sleep, not in dream, but awake and sharp as flint. Eleanor approached carefully, knelt beside her. "Where did you hear that name?" Clara didn't answer, but her hand moved to her chest, fingers brushing the locket. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Eleanor sat with the small box where she kept her son's things, photos, letters, trinkets, and dug out the magnifying lens she hadn't used in years. She laid Clara's locket on the table, hands trembling slightly, and turned it over. The engraving was faint, almost invisible beneath time and wear. But with the lens she saw it. Delicate letters etched beneath the hinge. Benedict, 1866. She exhaled slowly, then carefully opened the back clasp. It gave way with a soft click, revealing the hidden compartment. Inside, a faded photograph. A man and woman, finely dressed, with a little girl between them. No older than Clara had been when she first arrived. Eleanor stared at the girl. Same black hair, same solemn eyes. There was no mistake. This locket belonged to Clara. She placed it gently back on the table, her heart hammering. The name meant something, not just to Clara, but to someone out there who had once claimed her. The photograph confirmed what Eleanor had feared for years. Clara had come from a world that was taken from her, a world she might someday return to. But who were the Benedicts, and what had happened to them? Eleanor needed answers, and she knew the town records office might be the first place to start. Names, dates, deaths. Dry Hollow kept everything, tucked away in drawers and ledgers thick with dust. Still, part of her hesitated. What if this truth unraveled everything they'd built? What if knowing meant losing Clara? But she had spoken. After 7 long years she had spoken, and the name she gave wasn't random. It was a door, a key, and now that it had opened, Eleanor couldn't close it again. She would find out who the Benedicts were, and why their name had come back through Clara's lips. The following week, Eleanor rode into Dry Hollow alone. Clara left in the care of a neighbor who owed her kindness. The road felt longer than usual, every hoofbeat echoing with uncertainty. The name had lingered in her mind for days, digging its roots deep. Benedict, 1866. The year etched in the locket matched Clara's age. Something had happened. Something violent, Eleanor suspected. She was determined to learn what. The town records office sat behind the courthouse, its stone walls stained with sun and time. Inside, the air was thick with dust and ink. Ledgers lined the shelves, labeled in faded script. Eleanor approached the clerk, a stooped man with spectacles and a voice like dry leaves. "I'm looking for information on the Benedict family," she said, keeping her tone steady. He raised an eyebrow. "That's a name I haven't heard in years. They lived around these parts?" He nodded, pulling a thick volume from a low shelf. "Owned a vast ranch northeast of here. Wealthy, influential. Their name carried weight." He opened the book and pointed. "Benedict, Thomas, wife, Evelyn, one daughter, Amelia?" Eleanor's breath caught. "What happened to them?" He turned the page, finger running along a handwritten entry. "Family killed in 1868. Home burned to the ground. No survivors reported. Case marked closed. Blamed on raiders." "No survivors?" The clerk shook his head. "That's what the report says. Tragedy. Folks talked about it for years." Eleanor left the office with the name Amelia Benedict carved into her thoughts like a brand. Clara. The age matched, the locket matched, the photo, the silence. Clara wasn't a stray child. She was Amelia Benedict. heir to a legacy that had been buried in ash and lies. She rode home under a sky painted in copper and lavender, the truth heavy in her saddlebag. That night, as Clara braided her hair in front of the fire, Eleanor studied her features, the jawline, the dark eyes, the trace of nobility in her posture. Yes, she belonged to that name, but what would it mean to tell her? Clara had known nothing but this ranch. She barely remembered the fire, if at all. Would reopening that chapter heal her, or destroy the fragile peace they'd built? And more urgently, why had someone left her for dead? If the fire was no accident, if the raiders were a cover story, then someone out there had tried to erase Amelia Benedict from the world. Eleanor stared at the locket, its surface dulled with time. The initials on the back now felt heavier than gold. She folded the photo into her journal and hid it away, unsure of what came next. All she knew was that silence could no longer protect them. A name had been spoken, a past had stirred, and now Eleanor had to choose: bury the truth again, or prepare Clara for a life that might come calling for her. Either way, their days of quiet were numbered. It was just past noon when the man arrived in Dry Hollow. Dust clung to his boots, a long rifle strapped across his saddle, a silver star pinned discreetly beneath his coat. His name was Silas Crowley, and though most didn't recognize it, those who did stepped aside. He wasn't the law. Not exactly. He was what the territory called a bounty man, one who hunted not for justice but for payment. Yet there was something different in his gaze, something old, something personal. At the saloon he ordered water instead of whiskey and laid a folded paper on the counter, a wanted poster yellowed with age. The barkeep leaned over to see. "Judge Whitmore," he muttered. "That old buzzard still breathing?" Silas said nothing, just slid the paper back into his coat and asked, "Any Benedicts ever passed through here?" The barkeep chuckled. "That name's cursed. Whole family wiped out years ago." Silas's jaw tightened. "What about the girl?" The barkeep frowned. "No girl. They said the child died with them." Silas nodded once, slowly, then asked for directions to Eleanor Hayes's ranch. Back at the homestead, Clara was quiet as usual. Eleanor was teaching her how to grind cornmeal when she heard hoofbeats. She stood, eyes narrowing. Few visitors came uninvited. Fewer came twice. She stepped outside, rifle in hand, as Silas dismounted. He tipped his hat slightly. "Eleanor Hayes?" "Who's asking?" "Name's Crowley. I'm looking for someone. A girl." "You got the wrong ranch." "I don't think I do." They stared at each other, a silence sharp enough to cut. Finally, Silas spoke again. "I worked security for the Benedicts, years ago. I remember their daughter. Black hair, locket, quiet as morning snow." Eleanor didn't lower the rifle. "That girl's gone. Maybe. Or maybe someone tried to make her disappear." Eleanor's grip tightened. "What do you want?" "I want the truth, and I want to protect her. If she's who I think she is, then there are men who'd kill to make sure she stays forgotten." Eleanor didn't reply, but the fear in her chest stirred like an old wound. She didn't trust him, not yet. But something in his voice rang true, and deep down, she knew the storm they'd both been waiting for was near. Inside, Clara pressed her ear to the window, eyes wide. She didn't understand everything, but she caught one word clear as day: Benedict. That night, after Silas had set up camp nearby, Eleanor sat with Clara beneath the stars. She didn't speak, didn't explain, but she held Clara close, feeling the weight of what was coming. Someone out there wanted the past erased, and someone else had come to stop them. The silence that had once protected Clara now threatened to betray her. Eleanor could feel it in her bones. Whatever lay ahead, it wouldn't come quietly, and it wouldn't leave without a reckoning. The following morning, Eleanor found Silas by the corral, watching the horses as if measuring their silence. He looked up when she approached, eyes steady, unreadable. "I'll only ask once," she said. "What do you know about what happened to the Benedicts?" Silas leaned against the fence. "More than I'd like. I was guarding their property when it happened. August of '68. I left the ranch 2 days before the fire. When I came back, there was nothing but ash. You think it was raiders? He shook his head. No tracks, no stolen livestock, no signs of a struggle except the flames. It wasn't random, it was a message. From who? Whitmore, Judge Elias Whitmore. He'd been trying to buy their land for years, wanted to run a railroad line straight through it. Thomas Benedict refused. Proud man. Too proud. Eleanor's jaw clenched. So Whitmore burned it down? Silas nodded. That's my guess. He had the power, the men, and the money to cover it all up. The sheriff was bought. The reports were buried. And Clara? I didn't know she survived, until I heard rumors about a silent girl, found wrapped in blood and mystery. Then I saw her, her face, that locket. He paused. She's Amelia, no doubt. Inside the house, Clara sat by the hearth, fingers curled around her cup. Her eyes stared at nothing, but her ears caught everything. She'd heard Whitmore's name before, in dreams in the spaces between her memories. That night the dreams came back, sharper than ever, flames licking the walls, her mother's scream, the smell of smoke and gunpowder, and then him, a man in black, cold eyes, laughing as he lit the match. When she woke, her pillow was damp with sweat. She wandered into the kitchen barefoot and found Eleanor sitting at the table staring at the locket. Clara sat across from her, hands trembling slightly. He was laughing, she whispered. Eleanor looked up. The man, Clara said, voice thin but steady. He laughed while the fire burned. Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. You remember? Clara nodded. He wore a black hat. He had a scarf and a silver watch. Silas stepped into the doorway. Whitmore's never without that damn watch. The pieces were falling into place. Clara's silence had hidden more than trauma. It had buried a testimony. But now the memories had returned bit by bit, like dust blown free from forgotten stone. Outside, the land stretched silent under the moon, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Silas rolled up his sleeves, jaw tight. If we're going to bring down Whitmore, we need proof, and we need to move fast. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. Eleanor looked at Clara. The girl no longer looked fragile. She looked ready. The past had awakened, and justice, long delayed, was about to rise from the dust. They left before dawn. The sun hadn't yet touched the peaks when Eleanor, Clara, and Silas saddled up and rode east. Their destination was the ruins of the old Benedict estate, where Silas believed hidden records might still remain, ledgers, letters, something concrete to link Whitmore to the fire. Clara sat straight in the saddle, her silence replaced by a resolve that surprised even Eleanor. The ride was long and dusty. Desert stretched around them like a dried-out memory, thorny brush clawing at their boots as the wind whispered warnings. They stopped once at a creek to rest the horses. Clara walked to the edge, knelt, and touched the water like it might remember her. "You sure about this?" Eleanor asked her. Clara nodded. "It's time." By late afternoon they reached what was left of the Benedict ranch, charred beams, collapsed walls, and the skeletal remains of a stone chimney jutting toward the sky. The place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by silence too heavy to breathe. Silas dismounted and moved with purpose, searching the ground near what used to be the study. Eleanor sifted through debris near the hearth, while Clara stood still, eyes scanning the ruins as if trying to align the broken shapes with the images trapped in her mind. Then came the sound, a branch cracking. Silas whipped around, hand on his revolver. Eleanor froze. "Riders," he said low. 3, maybe 4. Within moments, shadows appeared beyond the ridge. Men on horseback, dressed in dark coats, rifles across their backs, hired guns. Whitmore's kind. They didn't shout a warning. The first bullet tore through a fence post. Eleanor dove for cover behind a collapsed wall, Clara right behind her. Silas fired 2 quick shots, dropping one of the riders before they could dismount. The rest scattered behind rocks and brush, returning fire in tight bursts. "Stay down," he shouted. The gunfight lasted minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, 2 lay dead, 1 fled, and 1, wounded, was left crawling through the dust. Silas approached him, gun drawn. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood. "Same one who burned this place down." "Whitmore?" The man grinned with cracked teeth. "He's already ahead of you." Silas knocked him out cold and tied his hands. "That's one witness." Clara stepped forward, eyes narrowed. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. In the rubble, Eleanor found a scorched iron box buried under loose stone. Inside, half-burned correspondence, land deeds, and 1 letter bearing Whitmore's name. A threat, unmistakable in tone and signature. They had the link. Finally. Silas looked at the sky. "We ride to town at first light," Eleanor nodded. "And then?" "Then we finish what was started." Clara stood between them, shoulders back, eyes clear. For the first time since the day Eleanor had found her, she looked whole. Not a ghost, not a question, but a storm ready to speak. The town square of Dry Hollow was more crowded than usual. A local election drew curious faces and polished boots. Judge Whitmore himself was delivering a campaign speech from the courthouse steps, voice booming with practiced charm. Clara, Eleanor, and Silas arrived at the edge of the crowd, dirt on their boots, fire in their eyes. Silas held the letter tightly folded in his pocket. Eleanor scanned the square for deputies, 2 near the saloon, 1 by the bank, all under Whitmore's thumb. Whitmore stood tall, silver watch glinting in the sun, black hat casting a shadow that reached farther than most men dared. He spoke of order, of progress, of justice, words that rang hollow to those who knew better. Eleanor whispered to Clara, "Are you ready?" Clara nodded. Her hands trembled, but her feet didn't move. She walked forward, slow but sure, slipping through the crowd until she stood not 10 feet from the judge. Whitmore faltered mid-sentence when he saw her. His smile flickered. "Something you want to say, child?" he asked, voice low. Clara raised her chin. "My name is Amelia Benedict." A hush fell like thunder. Whispers rose, faces turned. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You're mistaken." "No," she said louder. "You killed my family. I remember the fire. I remember your voice. You laughed." Someone gasped. Silas stepped forward and raised the letter high. Signed threat from Judge Whitmore, dated July 1868, 1 month before the Benedicts were murdered. "We also have a living witness." One of the deputies reached for his holster, but Eleanor leveled her rifle in warning. "Don't!" Panic rippled through the crowd. Whitmore's face darkened, the smile gone. "You think anyone here believes a child, a dead family's ghost?" Silas moved closer. "I believe her. So does Eleanor Hayes. And the Benedict estate still holds legal claim to over 300 acres of rail land. That's why you tried to bury her." The sheriff, red-faced and sweating, pushed through the crowd. "Is this true, Judge?" Whitmore didn't answer. Instead, he lunged, straight for Clara. But Silas was faster. He tackled him to the ground, pinning his arm as the sheriff finally drew his weapon. "He's under arrest," the sheriff barked, now surrounded by townsfolk no longer willing to pretend. Eleanor rushed to Clara, wrapping her arms around her as Whitmore was dragged away, spitting curses into the dirt. The crowd parted like a tide around them. Some faces were stunned, others were ashamed, but none could look away. The truth had been spoken, not by lawyers, not by politicians, but by a girl once left for dead, who found her voice in the ashes. Clara looked up at Eleanor, then at Silas. She was no longer a shadow, no longer a question lost to time. She was Amelia Benedict. And now, the whole world knew. The days that followed moved like sunlight through dust, quiet, golden, slow. Judge Whitmore was transferred to Prescott under armed escort. His arrest sent ripples through every courthouse in the territory. Newspapers printed Clara's name. Some called her the Ghost Girl, others the Fireborn. But in Dry Hollow, they simply called her Brave. Silas stayed one more night, then packed his saddle. He left without fanfare, only a quiet word to Eleanor and a nod to Clara. "Truth's a sharp thing," he said before riding off. "But you swung it well." Clara watched him disappear over the ridge, a small part of her heavy, though she didn't fully understand why. Legal papers arrived days later. A lawyer from Tucson confirmed her identity. The Benedict estate, long considered lost, was restored to her name. Land, assets, even a bank account Eleanor hadn't dared to imagine. But the child who once trembled in her sleep didn't speak of riches or revenge, only of home. "I want to stay," Clara said one evening, as Eleanor folded laundry by the hearth. "Here, with you." Eleanor paused, a shirt in her hands, heart caught mid-beat. "You don't have to," she whispered. "You have the right to start fresh anywhere." Clara shook her head. "You're my mama." That word, spoken softly but surely, broke whatever wall still remained. Eleanor pulled her close, arms wrapped tight, and for the first time the silence between them was filled not with grief, but gratitude. Life returned to a slower rhythm. Clara planted new flowers beside Jacob's tree. Eleanor painted the fence white again. The locket still hung around Clara's neck, but it no longer felt like a chain. It was a memory, part of her, but not all. Letters came, visitors too, some curious, some kind. One day, a man brought her an old book with her family crest inside. She thanked him politely, then returned to helping Eleanor knead bread. The land that once bled sorrow now breathed peace. Eleanor sometimes caught Clara humming while feeding the chickens, a sound she thought she'd never hear. Lightness had returned to her steps, strength to her voice. The girl who arrived wrapped in blood had become a young woman full of life, and yet she never forgot. She visited the ruins one last time, placed a single wildflower on the scorched earth. No words, just silence. This time a silence of closure. As they watched the sunset together weeks later, Eleanor leaned close. "You changed everything," Clara smiled. "So did you." Their story didn't end with fire. It began there, and now it lived on, in each sunrise over the hills, in each quiet morning on the ranch, in every breath taken without fear. If Clara's journey moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. And for another unforgettable tale of courage and redemption, click the next video waiting on your screen.